there. I don't always behave or exhibit that that same rigorous attention to time, but we're going to do our best today. What I proposed to Ori when this session was on the drawing boards was, I know that in the last 2 years, Damon, thank you, Damon, has been organizing a discussion about AR standards. And I said, this time what I'd like to do is to focus on what the real end game is, which is to be able to prepare content once, or something in that single-digit number of times, prepare content, have developers focus on what they do best, that's design of experiences and so forth, and then have a series, through a series of standards and open interfaces, be able to have those experiences accessible from many, many different devices, many different client applications, and any place in the world, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, I think, spiritually, that's where we've all started. Some people are new to standards, some people don't like standards at all. My personal conviction is that they are a route by which to achieve this open and interoperable goal that I described. Publish once, view anywhere, on anything. So 2 years ago, a little over that, I started something called the AR Standards Community. Sometimes I throw in the word international in there. I don't think that's really relevant anymore, but the community is a really an ad hoc organization that gets together 3 or 4 times a year, and we're working together. And I'm going to describe that to you. I'm going to introduce in a few slides what we do when we get together and why that's important to you. The other people who are on this panel are people who contribute. At least Neil Trevitt and Martin Lechner have participated a lot in those past community meetings, and they have their own contributions to make to this topic of open and interoperable AR. And we've invited Avi from Microsoft to also tell us how a company of his size and with that background and their current activities, how they view standards and this subject of open and interoperable content. So that's the idea that we've got behind this session. I think our talks will probably take up a total of 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and then we'll spend the rest of the time discussing what one another said, if there was any controversy. I'm not sure that there will be, but I'd like to also encourage those of you in the audience to prepare your questions. I know people who have not been inhibited and you've been doing a good job, but be thinking about what you want us to discuss. All right, as I mentioned, the community for open and interoperable content and experiences is grassroots. It's ad hoc. It doesn't have an address, a physical address. It has a digital address, and we operate this arstandards.org web portal. There are some mailing lists, and as I mentioned, we meet from time to time, and the purpose is to reduce the barriers that exist today and are likely to exist for some time to come, that prevent people from publishing their AR experiences quickly and being able to get those viewed anywhere, anytime. We do this, we achieve that reduction of barriers by collaborating. So who comes to those meetings? Well, we've got people who are just representing themselves. We have companies, large companies and small companies, hardware, software, definitely a variety of different constituents have been coming. We get about 40 to 50 people a meeting. There's about 250, if I'm not mistaken, depending on which of the lists you look at. There's not been much traffic on those in the recent past. I'm hoping that we can change that. And we do have standards organizations. I'm not sure if that's exhaustive, but I think so. So we collect, what we do is we kind of do a scan of the different standards development organizations in the first half of the first day. Each SDO comes and gives us a short presentation about what they've been doing since the last meeting. What are the achievements they have? What are they going to be doing? And what do they need from the community? So we scan and kind of monitor what's happening in the advancements in the standards development organizations. That permits us to detect where there's overlap. We call that redundant, no, conflicting. There are some domains that are so hot that are relevant to augmented reality, but there's so many different standards organizations that feel they have important contributions to make to that subject. So you'll hear more about that. And then we also try to, in the second day, come up with ideas and make suggestions of new areas. We try to give this grassroots-driven environment to suggest new places where people can, so that's it. That's the next slide. Provide inputs to the SDOs and find and detect the emergence of new problems or new needs that developers or the providers of hardware and software might need to have solved through a standards approach. We also create some things we call the resources of the community. And those resources include this augmented reality reference model. We believe that this reference model is going to permit us to speak with a common language and be referring to the same thing at the same time. That's one of the tricks of the trade with standards development organizations is they're very, very rigorous and very deliberate about the terms that they use. But not everybody defines the terms in the same way or use the same terms to mean the same thing, and it causes a lot of problems, a lot of conflicts. The AR reference model is an important resource, and what each time we meet, we try to get together and improve it, advance it, and so forth. So in our most recent meeting in Austin in March, what we did, each time we're trying to understand where the standards contribute to resolving a problem or where they overlap. Remember I mentioned this conflicting areas. We also want to find out where is there nobody looking after a particular block in the reference model that we might need to initiate new work. So this is currently what our landscape of standards bodies looks like. It's definitely a work in progress. So if you know of other standards organizations that might be doing relevant work to augmented reality, please send them our way, make suggestions to me or to anybody that participates regularly in the community. The community's next meeting is going to be in Geneva on July 23rd and 24th. It's open. We will be at the meeting at the ITU, ITU Telecommunications Union in Geneva, and we've really had good reception. And ITU is not doesn't have active specifications for augmented reality. How you get data from A to B is what they're concerned with. It's not necessarily a showstopper or relevant for augmented reality. So. That's how I wanted to start off and introduce you to the community. And now I think I'll turn it over to, I don't know which, we didn't really discuss the order of things, did we? Yes, that was my job. So let's see, I'm going to see which presentations on the screen after I'm done. That's going to be how I decide. All right, so do you have any questions so far about the standards community, just generally?
A question and then a comment. First question, will there also be a standards meeting at ISMAR, which will be in Georgia?
Yes, that's the 7th one.
Okay.
ISMAR in Atlanta, November. We're going to do it right after ISMAR, 8 and 9.
Okay. And then the comment is as you guys prep your questions, if you could just please come up to the microphone, so that way those that are streaming or when the question is addressed, if you don't come to the microphone, if just the speaker could repeat the question for those on the stream. Thank you.
You know, I didn't touch the monitor or the display, nothing, but I did. Everything's fine. He's saying he's...
One moment. This is a running joke of the room is finding the projectors.
Okay, good. So maybe Neil will introduce himself while we're waiting.
Okay. Well, thank you, Christine. My name's Neil Trevitt. I am the president of Kronos Group, which is a standards organization. And a quick shout out to Christine in the AR Standards Forum. It's a forum where people talk that don't normally talk, and it's actually proven to be incredibly useful, much to my surprise, in a good way. So I only have a few minutes. I'm going to talk fast because we're doing a lot in this area, and I want to kind of give a good context for the panel discussion, which is the interesting part. So Kronos, we're an open standards organization. We're open to any company. We focus on defining APIs where the software and silicon connect. We have about 100 companies that are members currently. And this is a session about standards. So why are standards useful? The standards, I think, are useful because they define interoperability. So we can create together as an industry compelling user experiences that people want to buy. And we can do it cheaply enough because we're not constantly reinventing the wheel, that we can create mass markets. Standards are not charity or open source necessarily. A good standard should be fairly hard-nosed and pretty commercial, with the goal of making a market and making money for the market participants. And the mobile space in particular, I think you can make a good argument that the mobile industry wouldn't exist without standards. One obvious example is all of the I/O standards, all the various wireless standards that we all use in our phones every day without giving a second thought. So what needs to be standardized? Well, we're defining interoperability, so it's basically interfaces that we're defining, interfaces between all kinds of different things. So the Kronos focus, I just said, is interfacing software to silicon, these acceleration APIs for graphics and compute and vision and cameras and stuff. And we're increasingly finding that the APIs which we define have to have interfaces between them, as well as interfaces up to the application, because these APIs have to work together. We're also working on interfaces for 3D tools. The 3D tool pipeline, Collada, is an asset interchange format that lets people interchange and exchange 3D data. And an emerging problem space that I'm interested to talk about is how we interface clients and servers with 3D data, a 3D transmission format. So we'll talk about some of those in a second. But standards in the real world, I mean, standards don't exist in isolation, and there's a few kind of rules of thumb that we've learned at Kronos over the years. If you're trying to do R&D in a committee, you're probably doing something wrong. You should be refining by committee, not designing by committee. The problem space needs to be pretty well defined, and a range of options for solving that problem need to be defined. Then that's the time to come together as an industry to figure out the right way forward to everyone's benefit. And everyone is constantly in this dynamic dance of portability and reduce costs. Well, that's good, but we also need to innovate, and we also need to differentiate. Now, particularly the silicon vendors and the OS vendors and the other players in the industry, we have to differentiate, else there's no point being a player in the industry. So a well-designed standard will enable innovation and will enable competition, but competition normally at the implementation level, rather than just making up arbitrary functionality that's different for its own sake. And again, it's kind of interesting. It seems to be like a rule of the universe that every successful standard has a nemesis or a good partner, actually, because OpenGL has DirectX, OpenCL has CUDA, HTML5 has Flash, Collada has FBX, Autodesk. You go on and on and on. Every time there's a standard, there's a proprietary de facto standard too. And the ecosystem seems to work the best when they're both being actively developed and there's a healthy competition between the two. So busting some standardization myths. One, standards are slow to develop. Not necessarily. If your goal is time to thriving ecosystem rather than time to a spec document that you've written and you want to start showing to people, cooperating in a good, well-organized standards organization can be the fastest way to get to money. Another popular myth is if I participate in standards, I lose my IP. Any standards organization worth its salt will have a very well-defined IP framework that protects the IP of the members as well as protecting the specification in the market. And the other most pervasive myth is standards are boring. And it's absolutely not true normally. Don't laugh. A good standard is actually interesting to participate in because you are actually figuring out real problems with the industry with typically really good people, and it's actually fun, normally. So some of the things that we're doing at Kronos, this was a slide I showed yesterday, but it's interesting to see how the APIs evolved. We started out with desktop APIs. We're now doing mobile APIs. They were originally APIs that were designed to not interoperate particularly. You'd have your sound API, your video API, your graphics API. Those days have gone. All the APIs need to interop together, and we're doing input as well as output processing. Sensor processing and vision processing is kind of the new wave. And then, last but not least, for portability across multiple operating systems, HTML5 does seem to be an interesting platform that's going to be supported everywhere. The question is, how can we enable advanced applications like AR in HTML5? We have some way to go. So let me dive down on just a couple things, then I'll hand over to the next speaker. This need for a transmission standard, I think, is really key for the 3D industry. All the other industries, they have their standard. Why can't we have ours? So audio has MP3, now video has H.264 and other standards. Codecs, images have PNG and JPEG. And you take those transmission standards, when it's possible to send that media across the web in a compact and efficient form, all kinds of interesting things happen. Now, audio, Napster was the original, but now things like Amazon, video, YouTube, images, Facebook, 3D, there's nothing. And so we need, I think, as an industry to come together to figure out how we can define a codec for advanced 3D data, both animation and surfaces and geometry, textures, and there's a potential collaboration growing between Kronos and MPEG to try and figure that out. It is interesting, all the other transmission formats for those other media types are from the MPEG group, and they have been working on 3D, but it hasn't got any market traction yet, so that's kind of interesting dynamic. This is one other diagram I showed yesterday, so I'll go through it quickly. We are working, we kind of use AR as a use case. Oh, shit. Oops, sorry. I went too far. We are using augmented reality as a use case because it forces everything to work together. We have OpenMax for camera processing. We have OpenVL for vision processing, stream input for sensor fusion, audio with OpenSLES, graphics with OpenGLES, all working closely together. And then actually added the authoring pipeline so you can use Collada to author your 3D augmentations. And then this missing transmission format would let us encode 3D assets, transmit them efficiently, and decode them on the other end at the client end of an augmented reality app or other applications. And my last slide is how are we going to evolve HTML5? HTML5, the promise is it's much more than just more web pages. It's a true programming platform that has all of the functionality of the underlying OSs, but enables portable code. Well, suddenly that means for augmented reality, the HTML5 suddenly needs to have cameras, vision processing, multi-GPU, heterogeneous programming, all kinds of things that don't exist in HTML5 yet. So one way to quickly get there is not to reinvent the wheel, but to leverage the work we've done at the native APIs up into JavaScript. And we have that first proof point with WebGL, and we are working on WebCL, which is OpenCL JavaScript bound into the browser. We're working increasingly closely with the W3C to accelerate some of their initiatives like web audio. Canvas is a 2D vector graphics API, we can accelerate that. And then these yellow blocks are just brainstorming. Perhaps OpenMax bound up into JavaScript can provide excellent camera control, low-level image processing. A binding from OpenVL could provide vision processing. And the Stream Input Sensor Fusion API could, again, bound into JavaScript, provide a fast route for HTML5 to get all of this functionality that we know the augmented reality community needs.
Martin. Looks like it's going. There you go.
Alrighty, thank you. Hello everyone. I'm actually wearing two different hats. I'm the CTO of Wikitude, and today I'm actually going to speak about ARML 2.0, a standards development working group within the OGC, which I'm chairing. So I'm wearing this hat actually, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what we are doing, what we're planning to do, and what an ideal outcome would be. So, I mean, first of all, you know, when you talk about standards and standards development, scope is very important, especially with augmented reality, because augmented reality is a pretty diverse, pretty big field. Ties into very different technologies. And so we kind of, you know, got together and said, you know, we do have these multiple augmented reality browsers out there already. They're doing somehow similar things. So why not starting to standardize things and, you know, make it easier for developers? So this is what we came up with. Basically, we are focusing on mobile visual AR. So that means, you know, we are on a mobile device. Doesn't necessarily have to be a smartphone. Might be tablet, might be glasses somewhere as soon as the market's there. And, you know, we're focusing on visual. So, you know, there is something like audio AR, a couple of other different things. We are really focusing on the visual part, you know, computer vision components, projecting something visual onto a screen. So this is what we're doing. We are also, you know, in terms of how the standard will be structured and what our ideas are, is that we do have two different components, a descriptive format and a scripting component. So basically you can think of, you know, something like HTML and JavaScript working together. You do have a descriptive format which somehow describes the scene. So a developer would, you know, set up his scene, say, you know, these are my my virtual objects which are somehow, you know, mapped into the reality. This is how I describe it. And then there is a scripting component which actually allows the developer to, you know, change properties in the scene. And again, similar to HTML and JavaScript, this is kind of how we envision that this should work together. A little bit of a history, because I'm talking about ARML 2.0. Question might be, where's a 1.0? Or was there ever a 1.0? Questions coming up pretty regularly. So basically, ARML 1.0 existed, still exists, but was developed in 2009. Is a, you know, fairly old already. But this was kind of the starting point. You know, there were just a couple of tags which have been defined in XML, which were, you know, required like 2 or 3 years ago for augmented reality applications. So this was our starting point, and then, you know, augmented reality browsers came out, evolved, and now we stand here and have an augmented reality 2.0, augmented reality markup language 2.0 standards working group within the OGC. We had 6 founding members when we started out in 2011, and by now we grew significantly to 47 members. I'm not sure if this is accurate, but something like that, around 50 members. Including big companies, something like Ericsson, Oracle, EADS, Hitachi, Google, Hyundai, and a couple of others. So this is already kind of, you know, significant companies that are contributing to that. Probably Microsoft somewhere as well. We were going to have a chat about that. But anyway, so this is kind of, you know, how we're set up right now, and we're looking for, you know, having a sign-off of the standard in end of 2012, early 2013. You know, there's always a little bit fuzzy about the timelines, but this is what we want to do. Now, interoperability. I mean, AR is probably the perfect example that we actually need interoperability on various different levels. I mean, because you could definitely say that AR is a technology mashup. It uses different technologies, established technologies, and kind of combines them together. I mean, just a selection of you know, what we use in AR. I mean, we do use something like head-up displays or see-through displays. You know, something is projected onto a screen which you can actually view. You have a geospatial component in there. You know, this geospatial AR where all these markers are floating around. You do have, as I said, scripting components that so you can actually change the scene, so make it dynamic, react to events, whatever. You do have points of interest, you do have 3D, you do have computer vision components, and something like OpenGL, which is certainly necessary for good performance for applications. So this is kind of just a selection of technologies which are out there and are coming together with augmented reality, kind of combining all of them. So interoperability between these fields is obvious. It has to be, because AR is not reinventing all these different things. There are already standards out there which are supporting these technologies. And again, this is just a selection. In geospatial, you do have GML, CityGML, KML, GeoJSON, GeoRSS, a couple of other formats as well. 3D, Collada, X3D, there's XML 3D, you have OpenGL. In web technologies, you have JavaScript, you have HTML, HTML5 now. So, I mean, again, here interoperability as well, because AR needs all these things and others. And so it is definitely required to talk about interoperability and get these standards development organizations, get these technologies together to see what's the best solution for an AR standard. That's about it. 5 minutes. It's good.
Great. Thank you, Martin. I think Martin really summarized why the community works and the community is established and what we're trying to accomplish, trying to get all these different logos and the hundreds of companies behind each one of them to talk to one another. So there's a lot to be done and a lot of really exciting work going on. And now I think we're going to be able to invite Avi Varzev from Microsoft. Do you want to come up and go through your slides, please?
All right. My name is Avi Varzev. I'm a principal architect at Microsoft. I have 20 years experience working in VR and AR. The most recent thing that we discussed was right on this stage last year, the same time, a project called Read Write World, which I would not quite describe as augmented reality, but I would describe it as an unstandard approach to being able to put worlds together, be able to put the data together that you would need if you were going to build AR or other experiences on top of it. And I'm going to talk to a little bit about my philosophy. Some of these are my own personal thoughts. I certainly work for Microsoft. It's a big company. There's a lot of people who have a variety of opinions and approaches to dealing with standards, but mostly going to speak to how I look at these things and the approach that I take. So Christine asked, she gave us some key questions to talk about, 4 of them, so I only really have 4 slides, so hopefully it'll take less than 5 minutes. The questions are really around the definitions of open, extensible, interoperable, and rather than try to pin those down, so everyone has their own interpretation of what those mean, I rephrased it into the question of what are we actually trying to achieve. And there's a kind of a vector there of the general things that we want. Not everybody wants these things. Plug and play hardware, sure, it's great for everybody. Write once, play anywhere, absolutely great. I'm still looking forward to the day where I can do that with web technologies, where I can write my application once and not deal with the headaches of features that are not supported or work differently. I think we're all in that same position. It's a noble goal. Escape the constraints of closed ecosystem. It's a debatable one. It's certainly a goal for most people. For the owners of the closed ecosystem, probably not a goal. There's a business model around their closed ecosystems, and they did it for a reason, and they want that. And sometimes it's a good reason. In the case of let's not put any names, but let's say a phone with a closed ecosystem. There are reasons that improve the quality of the phone. You could argue that the quality is higher when you have a smaller test matrix, when you don't have everybody creating a device and everybody creating an API and everybody creating a layer. You can make a much better experience, but it's also closed. And so you don't get the benefit of experimentation and the open ecosystem. So it's a decision companies need to make, and it's their decision to make. It's their product. We can choose to buy it or not. Future-proofing is an interesting one to talk about. HTML is a very good example of future-proof pages. You can still run the GeoCities pages with blinky text. All those things still work on modern browsers. Not that you necessarily want to, but when we make content, you want to have some sense that you don't have to keep rewriting your work just to get the benefits of the right ones play everywhere. More co-opetition, if that's actually a word, is I mean, it seems to be the heart of what Kronos is doing. You have a lot of companies that do want to eat each other's lunch, but they know that they have to work together in order to raise the sea level. So that they can all get to the problems that they really want to get to, and not all worry about the low-level problems every time. So these are all very good things to try to achieve, but you also have to make sure that you're all on the same page with this. So just to give a plug for Microsoft, we are very active in standards bodies, not all of them, and certainly we can improve in certain areas. But in general, Microsoft is in favor of standardization. It is beneficial to the industry. It's beneficial to Microsoft. Microsoft's also worked on what I would call quasi-standards, which are where you have a collaboration between some of the industry players. Sometimes that's more amenable to getting things done quickly, in terms of just being able to say, all right, let's agree. A good example of this is something like schema.org. So let's just agree on some common schemas, and it's a collaboration with Google and other companies that to try to not quite standardize, but come up with common ways of expressing data about entities in the world that you could put on web pages, and it's meant to be very open and extensible. Some of the issues that come up in Microsoft's history is I think that because Microsoft does a lot of cutting-edge R&D well before things are commercializable in terms of MSR, Microsoft Research, and other groups, it's usually too early to try to standardize these things. You wouldn't want to. You're still in the prototype stage. You're still learning a lot of things. And Microsoft shows a lot of things they're working on. There's a lot of things that they don't show. There are also other groups that sometimes can be frustrating because they will standardize things before they're commercialized and before they're ready. Just a quick example of that is it's very frustrating to see people putting latitude, longitude as a standard for location, where when we think about AR, of course, we want a much better way of expressing location and connections between things. And so standardizing things too soon can be painful. Okay, so for standards to work, from what I've seen, and certainly don't have as much experience in the standards bodies as Neil, I would defer to almost any question here, but just giving it some thought in terms of things that have agreed upon needs, things that we can all come together and say, yes, these are things that we really have to solve. The hardware interop, of course, the low-level APIs. Object sharing, yeah, it's a real need. There are some real reasons why there are so many different formats and different standards. It's not the situation that people don't want to interop and share. There's other factors at play. And world markup, and I'm personally very supportive of the idea of trying to figure out a way to both mark up the shape of the world and the content, and so we can bring this together in a similar way that content works in a browser. Standards have to be win-win-win, and I think we go wrong sometimes where we say we need to standardize for the sake of standardizing, and we need to take into account the market forces. And I know Kronos is certainly well aware of these things and has 20-plus years experience of doing this. Sometimes standards need to follow a market success. Sometimes you will have an effort at standardization, but someone else will come along and have a wildly successful application or service, and they will become the de facto standard. Sometimes it's okay to say that's just what happens. As long as the end goal is to have a standard and to agree on things, it doesn't necessarily matter who came up with it at the end of the day. It's the end goal that we really care about. And there are certainly cases where we've standardized things and those things have not become dominant, and we need to be able to let go of those things and to say, okay, that was something we tried to do. It was a good try, but something else came along later and became dominant, and that's quite all right. This should be a natural, open evolution, and hopefully the market forces win, and whatever works the best is the thing people use. So these are just some of my opinions about some of the things that we should be standardizing. Everyone, I think, is trying to do parts of these already, but in terms of what I see in terms of surveying the AR field, absolutely sensors and tracking is way overdue for standardization. Having coded to a number of trackers in my career, I would tend to resort to brute force to solve the problems of coordinate system transformations, and it's almost like, well, I'm a guy because I don't like reading the instructions anyway, but But trying to get these things working interoperably is just too much of a pain. Let's just solve this problem already and have a way of at least describing the differences between the sensors so that you could adapt them together. An open world model, I think, is ripe. I think the time in the next big conversation should be about how do we mark up the shape of the world so that we can start putting content in the world in a uniform way, as well as trying to get the content to be more uniform so that we can interchange it better. So that's a little bit later because there's still some R&D to be done in terms of the experiences and what kind of content we want, but I think the conversations can start. And I just honestly have no idea of what to do for the equivalent of VESA for HMDs in terms of display standards, low-level protocols. At some point, if you imagine that there is an ecosystem of multiple chassis, multiple display systems, multiple sensors, these all need to be plug and play. I certainly have some ideas, but I think that's something we should leave to the experts. So that's pretty much it for me.
Excellent. Excellent. I want to give the speakers a very big hand. Thank you, guys. I thought maybe what we could do is start off our panel discussion by asking the three people on that made presentations to remark or sort of comment on one another. So I really liked the order, even though in the end it was random, because the things that you said, Avi, the way you set it up was brilliant, and it allows us to really talk about opinions, not about facts, and Neil's presentation was mostly fact. You definitely shared some analysis about your experiences and shared with us about standards not being boring. And I laughed because there was this great comic I think I sent around about how standards are often require face-to-face meetings when they're being developed. I don't know exactly why that is, but sometimes people have the perceptions that you go to standards development meetings in order to go to exotic locations. And so your friends think that you're off on a junket, you're on a cruise ship or something like that, and your wife thinks you're always gone, you've got a girlfriend or whatever it is. And the reality of it is to really support standards, you spend a lot of time on airplanes, poor Wi-Fi, and it's a lot of hard work. So there's a lot of illusions, not just boring. It can it doesn't. It's all a matter of perspective. So I'd like to ask Neil and Martin to give feedback or to comment on some of the things Avi said. Is this the right time for standards, and what kinds of standards? What areas?
Hello. So I actually really agreed with pretty much everything you said.
Oh no, that's a
not
terrible
so good,
place to
we went
start
on
a
the
panel discussion.
But no, the had to think of something. But no, the comments on you have to choose wisely what to standardize, be open to ideas and competition between a standard. Shouldn't get any special rights in the industry because it's a standard. It has to fight and exist in its own right by adding value to the ecosystem. And standards that refuse to do that, I think, typically die. So I really agreed with what you were saying. I agree with your list too, kind of what we should be standardizing. On the markup language, I've watched Martin trying to wrestle the markup language issues. There's so many markup languages. It's acronym hell. I don't know how you keep track of it all. Everyone seems to have their own standard. I don't know if you would agree with that.
We need a ML.
Actually, what I was already saying that we should also set up some kind of standards working group for SDOs, for standards development organizations. So actually a meta SDO, so SDO for SDOs, because they're like, as Christine was saying, they're all doing similar things and in a slightly different way. So I partly agree on that. What I wanted to say about that is about timing is, in my opinion, a standard makes sense as soon as a couple of players start doing similar things, very similar things, but all different, even slightly different, or all a little bit different. So for developers, it's always hard to kind of make it available on all these different platforms, especially with AR. I mean, I'm coming from an augmented reality browser background. So, I mean, for us, the situation was pretty obvious. We had a couple of players in the field. Augmented reality is still young, still cool somehow. And it is important for us to get content, to get people actually using augmented reality content. But I mean, if there are so many different platforms, you cannot leverage all the platforms because of different formats they are actually requiring. So this was kind of our starting point, and I think it's actually a good idea to say, for an industry to grow, you should start with a common data format, which is basically our idea, our ARML 2.0 approach. So it is a high-level data format. So it doesn't touch on what Neil and Kronos Group is doing with all this low-level, I'd say, APIs. We're really trying to get a format for developers to actually publish on the augmented reality platforms. And so this is kind of my comment on the timing discussion.
And Martin's also, I think, in support of what Neil's and the Kronos Group is doing. And there's nothing you can really, yeah?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't need that. It's just a different level. So I'm not saying that it's not necessary.
Are there people in the audience who think it's too early for augmented reality to be open and interoperable? And we should continue to have silos? They're in the other rooms, right? Oh, no, there's somebody. So it's Lionel, right? No? Leonid, okay. You're with Deco. You think it's too early for there to be standards in this area. Please express yourself.
Sure. I guess the history
Could you get to the microphone, because then we can capture it on the. Thank you.
I was thinking about previous standardization efforts in different areas. So the first came to mind is television. So it was a long time when we had PAL, SICAM, and NTSC before HDTV became overall standard, maybe 5 years ago. Another area like machine vision cameras. So it's still like 4 standards to get output data out of them, and it is much more mature industry, and all of these examples, they have a lot of products already in the market to offer, and I don't think AR has any big products yet. So until products without standards are proven to be acceptable by people and people use them, in my opinion, it's too premature to talk about any standards. But
I think that depends if you think that AR is a product, and I would argue that it's not. It's a feature in many different kinds of things that we can accomplish for consumers, for enterprise and government. That it's a way of visualizing the information, and it's not even only one way; it's 100 ways. So we do tend to get tied up in some of this terminologies. We're not how we express ourselves on that. So I don't think we're going to have a killer AR app. I'm always fighting against the killer app for AR, but what do you guys think? Do you want to comment back to the remark from Leonid?
Sure. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to that. Not that we shouldn't have standards, but that it may be too soon. And I guess that one of the questions to ask is, how do we imagine, if you could, not that you have to imagine a killer app, but just imagine an everyday use of AR, needing interoperability. And certainly at the sensor level, at the device level, yes, because you can imagine a fusion of hardware from different people making up a solution. Now at the content level, you have to ask yourself, would I be using company X's browser and company Y's content? Well, eventually, yes, absolutely. In the short term, these things may be packaged up in such a way that they're not separable yet. Because while we know how to define, Remy Arnaud, who did Collada, a lot of the work on that is a friend of mine, we understand geometry. We understand polygons very well. And even then, there are new ways of representing surfaces that may not be as well represented in some of the older work. We don't necessarily understand behavior yet, AR behavior. We don't understand how exactly we want to script things to be interactive and to respond. And a good example of that I would give is I use this hypothetical Disney AR experience. I used to work for Disney. I don't speak for them at all, but you can imagine what they would do if they had AR. I'll speculate. And you could imagine being I'll try to bring up all the problems that would be associated with this, and try to run this on a different browser. So imagine Times Square. They've put a lot of money into trying to make Times Square a family destination. You could imagine a parade down the middle of Times Square that would be on every 15 or 20 minutes. Anybody who had a tablet or glasses, whatever, could see the parade. You could imagine Tinkerbell or Goofy leading you around to places that were Disney themed. You could imagine quite a lot of content that could play there. One of the questions of portability is, could you design that in such a way that you could take that experience and have it run on Market Street in San Francisco and work exactly the same way? Well, one of the problems is not how do you mark up the content of the Disney characters, how do you mark up the space in such a way that it works like a browser where I can say this is a frame, this is an anchor, and you need the equivalent of CSS for that. The other part is the content, though, because Disney may not want people to share that content. They may not want people to be able to do anything with their Goofy and their Tinkerbell because they're very sensitive about who uses their content, and so they're maybe not as concerned in that case about shareability. And working in the geospatial realm, I could say that's true of a lot of companies who have proprietary data and are less interested in porting it to a format that was common with everybody because the licensing is not even compatible yet. That even between a group like OpenStreetMap, who is all about making it shared and open, virally so for the moment, that you don't want to mix and match their content with something from a company who is selling their data. Because the OpenStreetMap data needs to accrue back to OpenStreetMap, and the other company doesn't want anything derivative. Still not very compatible. And so just solving the content format problem in interchange is not going to solve some of the fundamental experiential issues of how do you really make an experience that puts these together. And there are all sorts of browser issues that are going to allow Tinkerbell to work, allow Tinkerbell to fly and interact with us, which would be very, very difficult to standardize. Sorry, I don't mean to hog the stage.
No, I actually think that your example is a good example where we actually did need more standardization. I mean, that was differences for differences' sake. I don't think anyone gained, and then end user didn't gain from having PAL, CCAM, and NTSC. And perhaps the AR industry, with the appropriate timing, we can avoid some of those missteps. I mean, the other classic is Blu-ray, HD, DVD. They lost their whole market window because they faffed around for 5 years for no good reason. And if they cooperated, they would have got more. But I think at the plumbing, at the low level, I think we have the luxury of not needing to prejudge the content. The content is a much more difficult problem in trying to see the future. We can afford down at the plumbing level to beaver away and put together the plumbing and hope for emergent properties to arise at the content level.
Thanks. Actually, I would like to take it back and agree on something what was listed in Avi's presentation about coordinate transformation. Personally, I struggled 2 years at InterSense when I came to understand how everything works in 3D, and now I continue to struggle at DECA. So that would be really helpful.
This is too much agreement. We have to disagree more.
Yeah. I think. Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to encourage those of you in the audience, if you have questions, to come up to the microphone. And meanwhile, maybe I could ask a question that came up when Avi was talking. I think that the Disney example is an interesting one because what I would like to be able to do is actually to get Tinkerbell and Goofy and everybody in as many places as I possibly can, as long as they were distributed and giving some money back to the company that owned that identity, that property. And so what Disney actually wants is as many end devices being able to share the experience of the parade in as many places as possible. as long as they control some of the factors and they get money, they get commercial. So to me, one of the reasons that I've been happy about the evolution we've got, but still see a lot of room for work, is I'd like to get us to where there is a business model for the content creators. And the content creators, as long as they have to create the content, create the platform on which the content is distributed, create the content on which the platform is viewed, that's just far too vertical a stack. I want people who are, maybe not crowdsourced, but if I'm an expert in the surgery procedures on the eye, I don't need my all eye optometrists or ophthalmologists, or I don't need them all to use my platform. I just want to teach them how to do this technique better, get certified, and pay me for my content. So the idea of publishing once and distributing and having it being accessible in lots and lots of platforms and tools is a financial one. Yeah. It's a driver.
Let me riff on that, because I love that, and I'm passionate about that as well. I think one thing I forgot to put on my slide in terms of overdue, in terms of what we need to standardize, is the legal frameworks. And Creative Commons is the best thing we have so far, and I fully support that and want it to go further. Essentially what we need is the equivalent of machine-readable licenses that can express where am I allowed to use this content, how am I allowed to use it, who gets paid, if anyone gets paid, who gets credit. I think that's way overdue for the content industry. Much better to do that than DRM, which is a chop off your hand solution. When we can really do it with the scalpel, we can come in and say, it's okay to mix these things together because the owner will be okay. But the way it's done today, everything is negotiated separately. The contract that you have is very specific about which form factors you're allowed to present the content on, and so you would never be able to take company X's content and try it in a new place because it's prohibited legally. We have to get to a place where we have those open standards for legal interchange in place, and then the business models can follow.
Please.
Hi, this is a commercial-oriented question. Maybe Avi would be best for it. How would you view the AR ecosystem grand challenges, and have a few dimensions to this? One dimension is maybe cameras and sensors through processing through the operating system to the user experience. The other dimension is maybe what needs to happen first, and the timing. The other dimension maybe is how difficult. So if you could just speak for how we can go about getting from here to there, and how you see that
would take a really long time to really talk about it. But the short answer is it's a glorious mess. And there's no way to say what should or shouldn't happen first. You have to kind of push on all tracks as well as you can. You need to push on the displays as quickly as the market will bear and invest in those. We need to push on content as quickly as we can. All the experimentation, all the great things people are doing in startups and in research labs are all exactly the right things to be doing. History shows that eventually people will come in and do commercial solutions that are large-scale commercial solutions, and who knows when that'll be and who will do those things. It's not highly predictable, but it'll happen. That the small companies of today who are doing things in the research labs eventually will become parts of bigger efforts, in the same way that it happened with game development. There's still indie developers, but there's large game companies who produce things, and in terms of consumer graphics, have driven that industry. It's not yet clear who is going to do that for AR. It could be the same companies. AR Games is going to be very big, and there's definitely a lot of interest among those companies that I've seen expressed so far. You saw some announcements from Valve about things that they're interested in. So those things are fascinating. I think the evolution could go in much the same direction as we've seen before, but it could be something new.
All right, thanks.
The Darwinian mechanics are our friend, and it's another complex. It's a dance. It's an art getting the right balance between trying to standardize things that enable progress, but not standardizing the wrong things, because we need Darwin. We are early. No, we're just beginning of the evolutionary process for this market, and it's going to be fun.
So I want to kind of riff on the commercial side, that the topic that you're bringing up, and like I said, near and dear to my heart, about how can we make this a viable market and a business models that are appropriate for distribution of content. The question I have is, should the community, which has so far been working and really focused on having understanding between standards development organizations that don't usually talk to each other, well, they don't talk to each other on a regular basis about a specific topic, should that community that I described in my talk at the very beginning expand or take on any of the market education that needs to happen about, well, there's tons of market education. That's a conflict that I feel that our industry struggles with, over promise and under delivery. We struggle with questions of what different vertical market needs are. So standards are great, but if you don't have an engine that demands the content and that puts this, and that's the money, and then we've done a lot of work without much results. So do any of you have an opinion about whether the community should take on an industry advocacy role, or should the community remain kind of at this sort of like, the turntable on the Chinese dinner table where it spins around the different dishes? So do you have any suggestions or opinions or recommendations on advocacy?
Opinions, definitely. I mean, I'm on the same table as you are here, so as I'm a worker in this group. But basically what you were just describing is kind of, in my head now, equal to tell, for example, Google, that it's not possible to do what they actually suppose that they would be doing with Project Glass. And I don't think that this is the way it will work, in my opinion, because we would have to have these people in the group and say, there's just no point, because Google is all aware that this is not possible, what they are doing right now. And there's no point in saying, we as a group tell the community that what Google is actually presenting is not possible. I don't see any point in that. I think that Google has to actually, I mean, I'm just saying Google here because it's one example. Google is certainly not the only one. So I'm actually liking what they're doing. But I mean, with this particular video, they were just suggesting that the AR industry would be doing something that is not possible right now, and it hurts the AR industry to do that. Because we already got questions saying, let's do that. Let's do that together. As soon as the glasses are out, let's do that. And we always have to say, it's not possible, because what they are suggesting in the video, this all video, big overlay on this, through the glass, is not, this is just not what the hardware is like. So coming back to your question, I think the only thing we could do is get Google in there and say, you know what, community, this is what AR is probably going to be able to do in like a couple of years. Right now, this is what we can do, and then elaborate more on that.
Other industries do have advocacy organizations. This one doesn't. That's one thing. And an advocacy organization doesn't only have to set appropriate expectations. I'm thinking about like Small Cell Forum and Plug and UNP. There's a lot of industry associations that they have an internal role, which is to coordinate between manufacturers about messaging, or pool resources so that you have marketing campaigns that are more widespread with a consistent message. And there are a lot of advocacy organizations. Where is the one for AR?
I think we will need one. Perhaps, I hate to refer to the hype cycle again, but I think we need to judge where we are on that hype cycle. The right time to start a true advocacy organization is when we start the upward curve, because you have something positive to advocate rather than damage control. Because I don't think you're going to get a lot of organized interest in gene damage control.
Well, not organized, but potentially necessary. I mean, I think that you know, you could imagine the day comes when somebody is hit by a car, unfortunately, while using AR, and you can imagine a need for being able to address that as an industry and be able to say, we will have standards. We're not going to wait for the government to impose standards. We're going to police ourselves, and we're going to come up with ways of making sure that your game turns off when you cross the street, or whatever the appropriate solution is. So that level of self-discipline is important. Standardization is a part of that, but this is a little different. And part of, I think, what you were alluding to is a little bit on the marketing side as well. There's a level of self-discipline that we could have on the marketing. We can come up with all sorts of terms of 4D, 5D, ND, you know, whatever, that don't mean much at the end of the day, and they may confuse people. And it may be beneficial to do that. I think that, again, it may be too soon to do that, because you need to have people with significant financial stakes in that. And Google may be almost ready to be at that point. Other companies may or may not. Supporting a group like that is not cheap. It does take sort of dues and professionals to manage. Whereas I think standards can be done on a much more voluntary basis, because it's leading.
On a shoestring.
Exactly.
Okay, we're at the end of our time. Are there any other questions? I apologize for the agreement, but I'm delighted to be part of part of a happy family, and I invite all of you to learn about the different activities we were speaking about. Certainly visit the arstandards.org portal. You'll find lists of existing standards that are already used and available, what new activities are on, what the resources are that are available. So thank you very much for your attention.